following podcast is part of the Underdog Sports Podcasting Network. For a full list of our shows, as well as breaking sports news and engaging feature stories, visit us at www.theunderdogsports.com.
I'm Chris Horwedel, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the first edition of Tales from the Association. While this wasn't the first recorded episode, of those earlier shows it really did seem like the best entry point into the series. My guest here is Dan Dickau. Dan's a star point guard from Gonzaga who ended up being a first-round draft pick and playing for quite a few NBA teams over the course of a very respectable NBA career. In this episode, it's very clear just how much of a business the NBA is, and in fact the team Dan grew up rooting for actually ends up getting rid of him on 3 different occasions. I enjoyed talking to Dan. Aside from the interesting NBA stories, he talks a bit about going into broadcasting and this year's Gonzaga squad. We're very excited about this new show and plan to release 2 a week for the first couple of weeks. As a huge basketball fan, I can tell you that we've already recorded over 10 of these, and some of the stories range from heartbreaking to hilarious to shocking. We really want this to be a behind-the-scenes look at what being in the NBA is actually like. And spoilers, it's not nearly as glamorous as you may think. One thing I should point out is that at the time of this taping, we didn't actually have a name for the show Lockdown, so you do see that reflected in the introduction. Without further ado, let's get into the show. These are Tales from the Association.
Tales from the Association, yeah, it's going down. This the podcast, yeah, you heard it all around. Players hit us with that career, cause you know that basketball, man, is not always there. Sometimes it come and go from the recruitment to the college phase, back to the NBA draft, yeah, that's nowadays. Playing internationally, and at the life at a basketball, man, they gonna tell us all how it go. See, story is how now you know. Tales from the Association, yeah.
Welcome to a special edition of the Underdog Podcast. I'm Chris Horwedel, and my guest today, former NBA guard and Gonzaga legend turned broadcaster, Dan Dickau. Dan, thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Hopefully all is well.
All is well. So you, let's start at the beginning here. You went to high school at Prairie in Washington. What was your recruiting experience like?
Much different than recruiting is now. So I graduated in 97. Back then, there was literally only 4 AAU teams. We called them BCI teams from the state of Washington that went out and about and traveled to what people know as these exposure tournaments now. I was able to play going into my junior year for a team based out of Southwest Washington that was coached by my high school coach. And then before my senior year, I played with a group that was out of the Seattle area that I think of the 10 guys, 8 of us went Division I, the other 2 went Division II. But it was a great experience because being from just outside Portland, I would always have to go into Portland to play against guys who I felt could, help expand my game and work on my game. And then the fact that, you've got to break out of your bubble and be able to go play against guys from different areas of the country. And I think, after that summer before my junior year where I had some success with my AAU team, had some success at double pump camp where I made an all-star team, I started realizing, these goals that I had set to be able to play college basketball, aren't out of the realm. They are there if I keep working at it. And then going into my senior year, like I mentioned, I played on a Seattle-based team, but I also was at the Nike All-American camp, which was a big deal back then.
Sure.
I was the only kid from the state of Washington that was at that. The other kid from the state who was invited to a national event like that was Michael Johnson out of Ballard in Seattle, and he went on to the Adidas camp. So, that's how it was when I was in high school. Now, you look at the state of Washington, there's probably 40 AAU teams. It helps with exposure, but it also, I think, kind of waters some things down and gives a little bit of false hope to some kids that think they can play at a certain level that they aren't setting their goals at the correct level to play at.
Oh, for sure. AAU is kind of a polarizing thing. Do you think ultimately it's beneficial or a negative for the development of youth basketball?
Well, I think it's a necessary piece of youth basketball and exposure to be able to, play at that next level. I do know that USA Basketball has their kind of research up and going right now. They've got some thoughts about how they can help. I don't want to say clean it up, but help sanction it so that a lot of the negative stigmas can be taken out of it. I think that could be a huge piece. I think, I think one of the things that you're always hearing about AAU basketball for the States is, people are saying, hey, well, we don't develop players in the way they do in Europe. That might be true, but unless you're one of these guys who's got true experience on how these European clubs run things for younger kids, it's hard to justify a lot of your comments.
Right.
But if you just look at the straight, skill sets of many players that come up, that can give you a little bit of a basis for those comments. But I will say this, I think if you're looking at a lot of the younger guys that have come up in recent years, and maybe it's because of, Under Armour's and Steph Curry camp, paying attention to fundamentals, and the Nike academies with LeBron and Chris Paul focusing in on a couple specific weekends where they're really working with the younger kids. I think you're seeing some high school kids that are being the one and dones that are very polished skill-wise.
What do you think? Let's talk about the one and done rule. Where do you stand on that? Do you think kids should have to go to college? Do you think it should be more like the NFL where you have to stay for 2 years? What's your take?
I think if you're good enough, you should be able to go out of high school. I think I get it for the college game. It gives kind of a holding place where maybe you can have your name known a little bit more before you get into the NBA. But if you're looking at these one and done guys, I mean, they're only in college until their grades come out and keep them eligible for the second semester.
Right.
So I think it's a fake year of college for a lot of kids. I do think that if you gave them the one and done, if you gave them the ability to go out of high school, I think you would see some guys make some good decisions, and unfortunately, you would see some guys make some poor decisions. And that's where I think as a young guy, you don't know where to lean. So you would hope that you've got good guidance, direction from, a family background or an AAU program where, people are going to say, well, a lot of these kids in that position don't have that background. But I think the NBA is smart enough to see and understand that, where if they do get rid of that, they will have and this is just me speaking, I think they would have some sort of support program to help get true kind of observations and true guidance for some of these guys on the fence. So I think there should be no I think you should be able to go out to the NBA out of high school. I do think maybe if they allow that, but you go to college, I think maybe you look at that baseball rule. Well, or maybe I think you got to stay 3 years.
Yeah.
I think there's kind of got to be a mix, a give and take on both sides.
Yeah, you talk about them not being real college students, and I mean the Ben Simmons. I'm a Philadelphia 76ers fan, and the Ben Simmons One and Done documentary basically shows that this guy, he's never in class. There's no expectation of going to class. He's there to play basketball, and that's the only reason he is on that campus. Is there anything that these guys are actually getting out of the college experience? I mean, when we talk about the top level one and done, the Markelle Fultz, the Ben Simmons, Brandon Ingrams?
No. I mean, they're getting exposure and they're getting the ability to solidify themselves as a hopeful lottery pick. I don't think they're not gaining themselves any responsibility in the terms of being a student athlete. Now, I think there is a few where, guys like a Zach Collins who came from Gonzaga, from every indication that I was given last year, he kept working at it because he didn't know what he was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
He kept going to class. He kept working on his education up until he made that decision. Where you look at a guy like a Markelle Fultz or Ben Simmons, like you mentioned, those guys already know they're leaving.
Sure.
And so they're just basically going to enough classes to stay eligible. But truly, what are they learning? Because the way college athletics now is as a big business, they're learning the business side of it as opposed to the education side, which, that opens up a whole new conversation that, Jay Billis is one of the guys that's really kind of talking about the discrepancy and the differences. And are they true student athletes, or are they just athletes that are being used by universities?
Right. Earlier today, I recorded an episode with Scott Pollard, and Scott was very outspoken about players should be paid at the college level. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so. I don't disagree. The only problem I have is how do you truly divvy it up?
Right.
Unfortunately, you're going to have one program that generates a whole heck of a lot more money than another, and those programs that don't generate as much money are going to say, well, we got to pay equal. Well, that's not a free market system like a capitalist system that the United States is built on. But the NCAA has never treated their athletes in a capitalistic type situation. So it would take a whole lot of figuring out, and that's way above my knowledge or pay grade to be able to do it. But I agree. I think college student athletes for football and basketball should be paid. And the next part is going to come up is, well, what about this sport or that sport? They put in the same amount of hours. Yeah, I get it. You put it in the same amount of hours, but are you generating any revenue for your university or creating any revenue for a league or the NCAA? And the flat answer is no. The only ones that do that is football and basketball. And, I respect athletes in other sports. I respect the effort and the time they put into it. But just because you put a lot of time and effort into something and you're good at it doesn't mean you should be paid for it.
It's absolutely true. Well, let's get back to you. You end up at Washington out of high school, and at Washington, you're playing with future Philadelphia 76er great Todd McCullough. When you saw T-Mac, did you think this guy's a future pro?
I wish I could say yes, that I had a crystal ball like that, but I can say that, I played with a really good high school big who actually played with me at Gonzaga, and he had great hands, and he could finish, and he was great to play with. The first thing you noticed about Todd, whether, when I was on a recruiting trip, played with him for the first time or with teammates, is, his hands and his touch around the basket were phenomenal for a guy of his size. And a lot of people had question marks with him going in the NBA, but he proved a ton of people wrong. He battled, he played really well. The unfortunate thing for Todd is he had some nerve issues with his feet that really limited his career and made him retire too early.
So when we talk about guys like McCullough, and anytime I think of Todd McCullough, I think of Big Country in that same conversation. Is there a place for them in the modern NBA?
I thought there was a place for Shemek Karnowski at Gonzaga. I think he is very similar to those guys, at least size-wise. I think Shemek is actually bigger than what Todd was. Phenomenal hands, phenomenal touch around the basket. But again, that with the way the game is spaced and the way the game is played with pick and rolls, everyone's always going to say, hey, can this guy guard a pick and roll? Well, if you really watched it, Shemek was unbelievable at guarding a pick and roll over the last couple of years. If you statted it out, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but I know talking to Gonzaga's staff, they said he was their best pick and roll defender as a big over the last 5-6 years that they've had. And if you watched him, it's not because of his foot speed, it's because of his understanding of just how big he is and just how much space he can take up and how well he understands cutting angles off and using his advantages.
And Dan, when you watch how this game's evolved, do you just sort of kick yourself and think, man, if I would have come along 10 years later?
Actually, I do. And not in a negative way. I mean, I think it's just in a way that the way the game is now, with the emphasis on passing, shooting, handling the ball, it fits me perfectly. Mm-hmm. I think if you look at, at the start of my NBA career, it was still post-heavy offenses, isolated offenses. Kind of, hey, where's our mismatch at? Let's make sure we get the ball at that guy, as opposed to free-flowing offense with an emphasis putting on the skills that I had.
All right. So 2 years at Washington. The second year, you do get solid minutes, but for whatever reason, things didn't click as well as they could have. You end up transferring to Gonzaga. What made that decision?
Well, there's a couple things. Going into my sophomore year, I broke my foot in the summertime, and ended up, basically spending that summer rehabbing, and then basically barely getting back during fall conditioning to get ready for the season. Foot problem kept nagging, and then just kind of got to a point where I couldn't take the pain anymore. After a game against Arizona where I had to chase around Jason Terry, who was at the time player of the year in the country and the fastest player in the country as well. And then after the game, I was like, look, we got to figure my foot out. I can't even move. Come to find out, I had broken it again, and the doctors at that time said, well, looks like you had a misdiagnosis. You didn't break your foot. You just had a little bit of a bone bruise that was affected. And so, that was frustrating. That set me back. And then we realized, okay, well, time to have surgery. And so had surgery, and during that whole time, just started getting the feeling that UW wasn't the place for me, getting the feel that, maybe Gonzaga was a place that I needed to look at, because guys like Richie Fromm, Casey Calvary were buddies of mine, and that was the year they made the Elite Eight, and I saw how much fun they were having as individuals. I saw how much they were getting better as individual players, and I also saw, that there was a culture there after talking to those guys that, they were kind of building something special.
Yeah.
And luckily I was able to transfer and become a big part of Gonzaga basketball myself.
Yeah, I mean, that's an understatement. You had 2 great years with the program, almost 19 points the first year, and then over 20 the second. I believe, were you WCC Player of the Year that senior season?
My senior year, yeah.
So
I was Player of the Year my senior year. There's been many Zags that have won that award, and thankfully I'm able to say I'm one of them.
Well, that's awesome. How much do you keep up with that program to this point?
Quite a bit. I actually, just since we've been on the phone, one of their assistant coaches, who was a teammate of mine my senior year, just texted me. I was hoping to go down there and watch the fellas play pickup today, just because I got to start getting down there and seeing them a little bit before the broadcast season starts, because I do color analyst work for a number of different outlets, and one of them is the Gonzaga games. And so, it's always good to kind of see them in practice, see them in open gym settings before we get going calling their games during the regular season.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that program. Zach Collins is a guy you've mentioned already, and this is a guy who I was very, very high on going into the NBA draft last year. I actually think he got underdrafted a little bit with how talented he is. What do you think he has in front of him with his pro career?
I'm sorry, who was that you said?
Zach Collins.
Really quick. I think Zach's going to be a good pro. I think I would have liked to have seen him stay for one more year. And I say that selfishly as a Gonzaga fan.
Sure.
But I also, think it would have been good for his development, because if you look at his career, he's always kind of been a background guy. In college he was, playing behind Chase Jeter, Steven Zimmerman, who ended up both playing and being in McDonald's All-Americans, and then Zimmerman in the NBA. Jeter just transferred Duke to Arizona, so he never started until his senior year, where he kind of exploded on the scene, becoming a McDonald's All-American. And then, at Gonzaga, you know, he came off the bench. So he had some amazing games and really flashed a ton of potential, but he hasn't had to carry the load, so to speak, for a game, for a team, or for a season. And I think that's a learning curve that some guys have to go through. Now, I'm not saying he's not going to have a good pro career, because I absolutely think he is. I just think it would have been helpful if he would have been able to learn how to, carry a team, score when you're getting double teamed every time, make the right decision over and over again.
Yeah, it does seem like that Portland system is very conducive to what he does well, though.
I think so. I played for Terry Stotts in Atlanta early in my career. And at that time, he valued post-ups and different actions, and now he really values spacing the floor, movement, threes by anybody who can shoot them. And I think Zach's going to have some freedom to be able to gradually expand his range. I don't think they're going to give him the freedom to shoot threes in year one, but I think he showed last year that he's got touch out to the college line and that he'll get there in time because he's got good footwork, he's got good fundamentals, and he's got a good base to his shot.
Yeah, Gonzaga's got two other very interesting young players this year, both international players too, Killian Tilly and Rui Hachimura. I'm really excited about Hachimura. What do you know about these guys?
Rui's going to be a big-time piece for them this year. I think last year he probably could have helped them a little bit more if necessary. The only problem is that they go undefeated for so long and you've kind of got a great set rotation.
Right.
You want to get a guy like Rui some experience. At what expense? I mean, you've already kind of got things dialed and rolling. So they never really did that. But he had a great summer. I think it was the FIBA U19s. I think he was all tournament team. He had some really good games. 6'8", extremely long. He can shoot it out to three. His handle's getting better. I think the biggest adjustment for him coming over here is the culture and being able to quickly communicate on the floor what needs to be done, whether it's on offense or defense. I think, I think that's going to be key for him this year. If he can quickly understand and communicate, I think he's going to play a huge part in what Gonzaga does. And then Killian, I mean, he's just 6'10", long, understands the game, very skilled, great teammate. I mean, if you look at him, there were times that, he had every right to earn more minutes last year or say, hey, I want to play more because he was playing well. But how do you take minutes away from Zach Collins when he was doing what he was doing? How do you take minutes away from Jonathan Williams III or from Shemek? He was just unfortunately the big that was, stuck in that 12-minute-a-game hole as opposed to getting 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah. Do you see Hachimura as a small ball 4 or as a 3?
I see him as a 3. I think there will be times he's played as a 4 for Gonzaga this year, but I think his true position is as a 3 in the NBA.
The handle gets there, you think?
It's gotten a little bit better. I think, for guys who play the 3 position, I think, your handle doesn't necessarily have to be creative. It just has to be tight. What I mean by that is, being able to put the ball on the deck for 2 dribbles in transition where you go in a straight line and get to the rim. Whereas as a point guard, you've got to be able to snake in and out of traffic. You've got to be able to come off a pick and roll tight with defense and create space with your handle. And I don't think that's anything that Rui is going to be asked to do this year. And if he gets to the next level, like I think he will, that more than likely that's not going to be what he's asked to do either.
Right. So 2 great years at Gonzaga, and you end up as the number 28 pick in 1997. What were your expectations heading into the draft?
Well, I think I had 18 workouts leading in, and so it was an exhausting time. It was an exciting time.
Yeah.
I was all over the board. I mean, I think the highest that my agent and I felt that I could have gone was, I want to say 13. We felt really comfortable thinking I was going to be kind of around the 20 to 24 mark. And then with every draft, there's always one or two guys that sneak in higher that nobody anticipates.
Yeah.
And then because of that, one or two guys kind of falls down the wayside a little bit. And that, for me was a negative because I kind of was the guy that got pushed down a little bit because if I remember correctly, teams that were drafting between, say, 24 to 28, 27-ish, where you're starting to kind of get curious, they didn't have a first-round pick, and I didn't work out for any of those teams.
Mm-hmm.
And so started getting word on draft day that as it was going, that Atlanta, who I didn't work out for, was trying to find a way to trade up to get a first-round pick from any of those teams, and they found no takers until Sacramento was willing to make that trade with them at 28. So it's interesting. I mean, a lot of fans, are going to have an idea of how the draft works, and they're going to get excited about it. But, they don't understand the true workings, both on a player side, a player emotion side, a front office side, an agent side, and how everything works together. It's really interesting. It's really unique. It was a fun day looking back, but it was a stressful day also looking back.
I can imagine. So 50 games with the Hawks as a rookie. What's it like putting on an NBA jersey for the first time and all of a sudden you're playing against these guys you watched on TV?
Well, I think, first, I mentioned, having a goal to play college, but the dream from the time I was a little boy was to play in the NBA. So, it's like, wow, it's dream fulfilled. But as a pro now, you can't let that last for too long. So,
yeah.
You get right back down to business and you try to figure out how you can fit in with the organization and the team that you're with, and I've always been a big believer that in college or the pros, unless you're one of these absolute rarities, these guys that have been standouts from day one at any age,
mm-hmm.
It takes you 3 years to figure out how to adjust to the next level. And it took me 3 years to figure it out at the NBA level, after quite a bit of bouncing around. So there's an adjustment there that you kind of have to take from being kind of the guy in college, to being just one of the guys, in the pros, and trying to figure out how you fit in almost on a daily basis.
Yeah. You mentioned moving around quite a bit. Do you know how many times you were traded in your pro career, or you just try to block that out?
I don't know off the top of my head. If my wife by chance were sitting here, she could fire that number off, because she's the one who had to deal with, the moving and the packing and all that stuff.
Would you be surprised to know that you or your rights were traded 8 times?
No, absolutely not. That sounds about right. We always kind of got nervous on draft day that something was going to happen. My
mm-hmm.
phone was going to call.
So in 03-04, you get traded to Portland 20 games before being traded again. Is this like, come on, not again kind of deal?
It was, and that one was probably the second hardest trade to take, because I'm from the Portland area. I grew up around there.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up a huge Blazer fan. Clyde Drexler, Terry Porter, Jerome Kersey, Duckworth in the finals against the Bulls, and to be able to play for them was awesome. And then being traded away from them was not a good feeling at all. And then unfortunately a few years later in my career, I was playing for them again, and I got traded again, and this time it was on draft day.
Oh, that's rough. I can't even imagine what that'd be like to finally fulfill what's a lifelong goal of playing for the team that you grew up rooting for, and they're like, no, thank you. We've had enough of this.
Well, it's funny because that's happened with me now with the Blazers organization 3 times. So the trade I had just mentioned, the second time I was with the Blazers, I was traded on draft day after, I don't want to say having confirmations from the organization that I wasn't going to be traded, but
mm-hmm.
Being made felt that I was a part of the process moving forward with what they wanted to do. And then I get traded that time. And then, I was lucky enough to, join up on that staff as a player development coach during the lockout year when I thought I was going to get into the coaching side of things. And unfortunately, that only lasted for a year before, the whole front office and coaching staff, before the whole coaching staff kind of got shook up and I wasn't retained either. So, I'm one of those few people that can say they got fired from their dream organization 3 times.
Well, at least you have that going for you. That's a fun story, even if it's kind of a heartbreaking one.
Yeah, I wouldn't say heartbreaking. I guess maybe disheartening. Cause,
yeah, that's fair.
I've come to realize that, I think broadcasting fits myself and my family better. I think it also, my family and I moved up to Spokane, Washington shortly after. And I think that's been great for my family. We love living up here, and we never would have had that had we stayed in the coaching ranks. We probably, just as it was as a player, would probably be moving around every 2-3 years now as a coach.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm interested in 04-05 with the Hornets. This is your best season. 31 minutes a game, 13 points, 5 assists. Are you thinking, all right, I'm here, NBA, I'm ready to play?
Absolutely. I mean, you work and you prepare for an opportunity to play. And it finally came. And so I worked my butt off for that opportunity, and the opportunity comes, and I'm playing pretty well, feeling good about myself. And, it was one of those things where I didn't want to leave any stone unturned once I had the opportunity, and I didn't want to let anything come in my way when that came. And I was very, I guess you could say I was proud of myself because I went through, as
Definitely.
you mentioned, alluded to, some trades, some disappointing times where, I didn't play as well as I wanted to early in my career, so I couldn't beat a guy out, or, Dallas, who I was with that traded me to New Orleans, they were already set with, Jason Terry and Devin Harris at the guard. So there were no opportunities there for me.
Jason Terry has just been the bane of your existence since college.
He has. You know what? But he was a teammate of mine my rookie year in Atlanta. He's also a Northwest guy. He's from Seattle, Franklin High School. And he was a good teammate in Dallas, that's for sure. So, amazing to see he's still in the league.
Yeah, it really. And what do you think of Marbury trying to come back?
It's interesting. I mean,
you want to leave it there?
I mean, I'll just leave it there. I mean, good for him. He's carved out a awesome kind of career in China for himself. He's carved out the ability to kind of really be, from everything I've heard, a celebrity over there. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he's done a heck of a job extending his career. But, I mean, I turn 39 years old tomorrow. And, knowing that he's older than me, I mean, the preparation to get yourself back into NBA shape, holy cow, that would be difficult.
Oh, I can't even imagine. You're a little bit older than me, not that much, but I struggle just all of a sudden playing pickup twice a week is I'm sore for 2 days afterwards. I don't remember it being like this.
Yeah, luckily I haven't gotten to the point where, knock on wood, I'm feeling it a couple days later. Because, I guess one, I don't play pickup that often, but two, it goes to show, I think, just how good of athletes and just how good of physical shape players are at the peak of their NBA careers. And a guy like LeBron, who's now, I think 34, what he's doing and the minutes that he's playing and the workload that he has, I mean, holy cow, that's amazing.
I don't want to get too much into this, but do you have where is LeBron James playing next year in your mind?
I think he's going to the Lakers. I love the fact that he went back to Cleveland and he kind of, redeemed that organization to have an opportunity to win a title and then win a title. But that front office haven't hasn't done him any favors. I mean,
No.
yeah, they get him the guys that he wants to play with, your J.R. Smiths, your Kevin Loves, etc. But when it's so dysfunctional that you can't get your GM situated and you're firing a coach coming off an NBA Finals so quickly after some struggles in year 2, and it's just, I'm not privy to any insider information of any kind, but just from an outsider's perspective with that organization, from a guy who's been around the NBA and has seen different things, there's something going on there that isn't quite right. And so that leads me to believe that LeBron would leave to LA, and the way that, the Lakers roster is starting to form, I think Lonzo's going to be pretty good. I really like Brandon Ingram. You throw him on a team that, can lessen his workload. So come playoff time, he's geared up and ready to go. Holy cow. I mean, that could be dangerous.
Yeah, I kind of think Kyrie did him the biggest favor that he possibly could, even if it was unintentional, in demanding the trade, because that kind of gives LeBron an out in Cleveland. He can say, well, look, I came back. I wanted to make this work, but maybe the other guys weren't as into it as I was.
Yeah, true. I think it was interesting, how Kyrie forced that trade. But I think what people have to realize is you can't, as an NBA player, force a trade. I mean, you can think that you're forcing a trade, but if Cleveland didn't want to trade him, Kyrie has to show up to training camp. And if he doesn't, he starts getting fined. Cleveland probably realized that, hey, this guy's got a whole heck of a lot of value. Let's see what they can get for him. And they felt comfortable with the opportunity with the trade that Boston presented.
Well, sure. And obviously NBA players can't force their way out, but how much of a negative is a guy who just doesn't want to be there and isn't afraid to let it be known publicly?
I've never been in a locker room with a guy that's kind of asking to be traded. I mean, I've been in locker rooms where guys they're not happy to be there. I mean, those are a dime a dozen, but,
sure.
Actively, saying or having his representatives saying he wants to be traded is something I've never been a part of in the locker room.
Do you think Boston's better or worse than they were last year? I mean, they add both Hayward and Kyrie Irving, but they sort of lose what was their calling card in that defensive intensity with Jay Crowder and Avery Bradley. They lose the scoring and the heart of Isaiah Thomas. I'm not sure that they're better. I think they're definitely more talented, but I'm not sure they're better.
Yeah, I'm not a huge Isaiah Thomas fan personally. I think he's a very good player. But I think Kyrie is an upgrade. I think where Boston gets hurt is losing Crowder and losing Avery Bradley. I think those are the two guys that hurt them. I think Jaylen Brown is going to have a chance to improve and show what he can do and maybe open some eyes. I think Jason Tatum is going to be a good player. But you're talking about a rookie and a second-year guy, which there's a reason they went after Gordon Hayward. Even though they had those two guys, because Danny Ainge has been around long enough to know that you can't, rely on young guys to do big things if you're trying to go deep in the playoffs.
Fair enough. So after your NBA career is over, we have 2 seasons overseas. What was that experience like for you?
Interesting. Those seasons were actually all in one, and they were very short. I was I signed a 2-year deal with Avellino in Italy. But we only lasted about 6 weeks. Had an injury, had a contract dispute, and ended up coming back early to go to training camp late with Golden State. Didn't work out simply because I was kind of on the mend from the injury I had when I was over in Italy. And then shortly after that, I went to Germany and played for Bamberg, who's been, over the last 15 years or so, the best team in Germany. Was there for about 4 months until, unfortunately, I had another injury and realized that the Europe thing is an awesome experience and opportunity for a lot of guys, but it just wasn't right for myself and my family.
And then 2010, you're with Fort Wayne. Is this kind of a last-ditch effort? Let's see if this can work kind of thing?
I think so. I mean, I played really, really well with Phoenix in training camp. Steve Kerr wanted to keep me. I was the last cut, but the ownership group just didn't want one more contract, and so I kind of said, hey, I'm going to stay in shape through this as long as I can, and if I get a phone call, great. If not, around this time, I'll go to the D League. And so I went to the D League, and it might have been 20 games or so. I played pretty well. Was hoping for a call-up, half expecting a call-up, and it never came. And I ended up getting another small injury that just kept lingering, and then I had to be done. And then it was a lockout, and then it's for a lot of guys in the position I was at. You're kind of at the crossroads of, am I still a player? Am I looking at the next step of life? And the fact that the lockout was there kind of pushed me in the direction of, hey, this opportunity is coming with the Blazers to jump on as a player development coach and then start learning the front office side with scouting. And so I felt that was a great opportunity, and I still do think it was a great opportunity. It just didn't lead to a long-term position with them.
And that leads to your career in broadcasting, and you say this is where you should be.
Yeah, it's something that I enjoy. It's I think I've gotten better at it over the last 5-6 years. I've had opportunities both on the radio side with Westwood One for the NCAA tournament, as well as other games. I had my own radio show here in Spokane for about 1.5 to 2 years, and I've done the TV stuff for Gonzaga, for Pac-12 Network, a few things for ESPN. And, the beautiful thing about that is it keeps me around the game at a high level. But family-wise, if you get offered a package of games by a certain network, I can look at the schedule and say, hey, I would love to do 10 of these 11. I can't make this one because it's my son's birthday. So I don't want to do that. And for the most part, they're good with it. They get it. They understand. Where if you're coaching, you have no say. There's a game on the schedule. There's a practice on the schedule. You're there. And so that's another reason I really love the broadcasting side of things for myself and my family.
Last question I'm going to ask you, Dan, is you did a lot of work for the Pac-12 last year. As a Philadelphia 76ers fan, how excited should I be about Markelle Fultz?
Oh, I think he's great. I think he's phenomenal. I watched him closely last year. I watched the game against Gonzaga where I think he had 27 points. I think he makes the game look very easy and effortless, which for a lot of detractors, because, well, he's so good, how come he couldn't help UW win more games? He doesn't play hard. Well, I disagree. I think he's one of those guys that makes things look so easy that it almost makes him look like he's coasting. I think he is it's still to be determined. Is he a point guard or is he a two guard? I think he can do a little bit of both, but it'll be interesting to see how Brett Brown kind of molds him as a player and see what he sees his role as. I don't view him as a great shooter, but I view him as a really good scorer who can also make plays for teammates and make the right pass. I know, he played for Lorenzo Lomar, and Lorenzo is a guy that I've known since high school, and I really respect his opinion on guys. He had nothing but positive things to say about Markelle off the court as well with his character, and I think that's something that goes a long way for young players. If you have high character and you understand there's a process to how your career goes, you're able to work through some of the rough patches much, much easier.
All right, well, that was a special edition of the Underdog Podcast with Dan Dickau. Dan, thanks so much for talking to us. This has been great.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.